And of course, China will just sit down. It will not sit down. It will also do something to prepare itself that it can protect itself, militarily speaking and defense-wise. So this creates tensions in the region because it's not only China reacting. The ASEAN countries are also reacting, and they're not happy about these things. That the Philippines is militarized by the United States and its Western alliance. So this is really the atmosphere. The atmosphere is rising, Lena, and I
Mhm.
feel I'm afraid of this because any miscalculation on the ground will lead to an escalation of conflict, and it may be a military one. So this is not good for the region. We don't want to end up like the next Ukraine of Asia. Militarizing the Philippines being done by the United States would fuel regional arms race, compelling China even to strengthen and fortify its military posture as far as the South China Sea is concerned and as far as the Taiwan state is concerned.
Welcome, everybody. Today, we're joined by a fantastic guest and a really good friend of mine, Anna Molendag Uy, the Vice President at the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Anna is also a columnist at the Manila Times, and she regularly publishes her work at headsidebyana.com. I really enjoy her writing. Go ahead and give her a follow to stay updated. I'll share the links in the video description below. Anna, welcome back. It's been too long. It's so good to see you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Lena. And I'm really happy to be back. And I'm really happy that you're also now, doing your thing. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And I think it's for almost few months. And so I'm ready and I am excited to have this conversation with you, especially with topics that are very relevant and interesting, not only for my country, but even for the Asia Pacific region and even for the world. So thank you so much for giving me the space, the opportunity, and for having your platform on this kind of topics. Thank you.
No, it's always a pleasure, and I've been looking forward to this discussion. So there's so many things I would like to get your thoughts on today. First, it's the ICC arrest of former President Duterte, of course, and second, the latest military developments, the militarization in the region, including, of course, Pete Hegseth visiting the region and the stationing of yet another missile system. So let's start with the former President Duterte's arrest. In Western media, his war on drugs is portrayed first and foremost from the point of view of alleged human rights violations, which is then used as a basis for the ICC warrant and getting the approval from the public who doesn't really know the details and who's not familiar with the realities on the ground. So, is there any truth to the Western narrative of the events that led to the former president's arrest?
Oh, thank you so much, Lena. I think this is a very important issue because it does not only concern the Philippines, I think, but it is because since it involves the ICC or the International Criminal Court. So this is not just an issue of the Philippines when you look at it in a broader perspective or a broader picture. I think first and foremost I have to discuss a little bit about the fight against illegal drugs or anti-illegal drugs campaign during the presidency of former President Rodrigo Duterte. First and foremost, it has to be cleared that the Philippine anti-drug action during Duterte's time as president belonged to the legitimate law enforcement scope and operation of the Philippines. So it's not really true that it was like that the law enforcement agency during President Duterte's time in as they acted on what you call anti-drug operation was targeting civilians. There's no such thing. It was a legitimate enforced operation of the law enforcement agency of the country. So there was no policy whatsoever or sanction by the state to target civilians. The illegal drug campaign of the Duterte administration was directed to criminals, drug lords. Of course, there are low-level drug peddlers and all of these things. So all of this kind of criminal people. So this is directed to these criminals, not necessarily to civilians. So it's I am not I really don't understand why it has been framed in such a way that there was such a thing as a massive human rights violation. When in fact, if you look at the ICC case, there is like around 46 cases filed in the ICC as cases against the former president. And I don't even see it, legally speaking, to be align with the definition of what you call crimes against humanity. Because when you
Mhm.
talk about crimes against humanity in the international law context, it means there's really like a targeted attempt or a target to kill civilians. And the same manner what happened to Palestinians in Gaza. That is a tantamount to crimes against humanity. It's like tantamount to genocide. But that is never the case of the fight against illegal drugs during the Duterte administration. It was again a law enforcement legal operation within the bounds of the law of the country. And as a sovereign state, the Philippines has the right to formulate and implement anti-drug policy in accordance with its specific circumstances. When you talk about specific circumstances during that time, and that was around 2016 when President Duterte assumed the presidency, the Philippines was like a narco state. Really, I'm not kidding. So as the president of the country, one of his flagship program or project was to fight this illegal drug and the drug lords and all of these
Mhm.
people related to illegal drugs cartel and everything, because the country was like a narco state. So if you're the president, first thing that you have to do is to ensure that your people, the Filipino people, will be safe, and also
Mhm.
for the young people not to be under the influence of this illegal substance, which is all over the country. It becomes like a business. It's like a huge business during the time. I'm
Mhm.
not kidding, because I was there. I live in my country during the time every single day. And I know so many things when you talk about this issue of illegal drugs. So for us Filipinos, we were happy that at least we have at that time we have a president that cares for our welfare, that cares for maintaining peace and stability in the country, all across the country, and someone who is ready and has that political will to fight criminals in the Philippines. Because even I, when I was during the time, I cannot even walk at around 10 p.m. along the streets of Manila, precisely because I'm afraid that anytime soon someone will attack me. So
Mhm.
that is something that I think the world has to know. We were happy, to be frank with you, that we had a president who actually fought against criminals during his time. But
Mhm.
now you see he is in the ICC detention center being about to be trialed, because now it's pre-trial, about to be trialed on his fight against criminals. When in fact, actually, for many Filipinos, President Duterte is a hero because he
Mhm.
was able to bring back the streets to Filipinos during his time. Now, again, there's a rise of criminalities in the country under Marcos Jr. administration. And also there are a lot of, the drug problem is again coming up, and it's there. The Philippines already withdrew from the Rome Statute, and the effectivity of the withdrawal was March 17, 2019, if I am not mistaken. So in a
Mhm.
way, the ICC has no jurisdiction over the Philippines. It has no jurisdiction. And the Philippines under Article 86 of the Rome Statute, don't really have the obligation to even assist or surrender any Filipinos being subjected to ICC investigation for that matter, because we are not anymore part of the ICC. So the problem is the current administration of Marcos Jr. actually surrendered a bona fide Filipino citizen, a head of state at that, a former head of state who is well loved by many Filipinos, if not all Filipinos, to an external body like the ICC to be trialed in there, which is actually a violation of our sovereignty and independence as a country.
The current administration in the Philippines appears to be, I would say, very much aligned with Western foreign policies in terms of military buildup in the region. And the Marcos administration is certainly appears to be very, I would say, willing to comply with the requests. So how does China, which is a great power state in the region, just like the United States is in the Western Hemisphere, how does China view a militarized Philippines?
The way I see China right now is it is becoming anxious. It's really anxious to the point that it also I can sense that the China also, because it's anxious, it also becomes very aggressive in trying to, to send a message to the Philippines saying that, we don't want to start anything. We don't want to have an escalation of our not so good relationship, an escalation of the volatility of the South China Sea, because South China Sea is one of the flashpoints in terms of possible military conflict between China and the Philippines, and also in the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Strait is supposed to be not our concern, but you have EDCA, you have the US EDCA military bases. Some of them are facing Taiwan. And one thing that you have to remember, Lena, our armed forces of the Philippines chief, the head of the armed forces of the Philippines, just recently um made statement and pronouncement related to the Taiwan Strait issue, saying that the Philippines should be ready if in any case there will be a Taiwan invasion, and we will be dragged into it, and we will try to. It seems like he was talking about something like, I said, why? And in my mind, it's like, why is the chief of staff of the armed forces of the Philippines is even mentioning Taiwan's invasion in the very first place? Taiwan is not our concern. It's not our issue. It's a domestic affair. It's a domestic issue of China. So China reacted, and China was giving some kind of warning to the Philippines, saying that Taiwan is a domestic affair issue of China, and no one should interfere in it, which I agree, because that is not our concern. But in a way, the Philippines is located in that situation that it can be dragged really also in any kind of escalation in the Taiwan Strait, may be perpetuated by external forces, external powers. It's precisely because we have the EDCA, which is the US military bases, and some of them are really facing Taiwan. And as you can see, the Philippines is now being militarized by the United States in many ways. Aside from the EDCA bases, aside from EDCA, which you have the 9 declared ones, it's the US military bases. And again, some of them are facing Taiwan, near the Taiwan Strait, and even some of them are facing and near the South China Sea. And these are controlled by the Americans. You have also the Typhoon missile system deployed in the country. And now the Balikatan Earth exercises, which is upcoming, and it's a military earth exercise between joint earth exercise by our forces, the soldiers or our armed forces, and of course the American armed forces, but of course the Western, Japan, probably Australia, UK, France will be there to participate or be observers, is upcoming. And in the course of this joint military earth exercises, another, I think, Typhoon missile system 2, second one, will be deployed. Aside from that, there are other high-level military weapons that will be deployed by the Americans to be used during that military exercise. So if I am China, I would be very anxious, and I would always have this kind of, I'm like uncomfortable. And of course, China will just sit down. It will not sit down. It will also do something to prepare itself, that it can protect itself, militarily speaking and defense-wise. So this creates tensions in the region, because it's not only China reacting. The ASEAN countries are also reacting, and they're not happy about these things, that the Philippines is militarized by the United States and its Western alliance. So this is really the atmosphere. The atmosphere is rising, Lena, and I feel I'm afraid of this, because any miscalculation on the ground will lead to an escalation of conflict, and it may be a military one. So this is not good for the region. We don't want to end up like the next Ukraine of Asia. No, that is not good for the region. That's not good for the world, because this would lead to something else that will disrupt everything, especially economic wise.
Pete Hegseth just visited Manila, and it was the first stop in his trip to Asia as a defense secretary. back when you and I spoke a couple of months ago, the US stationed the Typhoon missile in the Philippines and provided millions of US dollars in military assistance. It was also announced that the missile system would be removed in late 2024, and my understanding that that never happened. It is still there. And not only that, but there's going to be, as you mentioned, there's as the
Yes.
second one that will be stationed there. It's actually in the process of being stationed there. So, what is your take on the US militarizing Manila? And what do you think the end goal may be with such aggressive stance on the issue, with effectively putting the Philippines on the line, and with the latest visit by Pete Texas to the region?
Yeah, and also Lena, to add, it's not just the Typhoon missile system too. It's not just the military air six joint military air exercises that is upcoming. They will be deploying a lot of high-level military assets, including anti-missiles system, I think another one. And of course troops on the ground. I think the American troops will be in the Philippines, of course, because it's a joint military air exercise. And as I have said, there's even one thing that I think I told you about before we go on air, is the latest, just April 1, that the US State Department approved a possible sale of arms to the Philippines, and it's worth 5.58 billion US dollars. And this is about fighter jets and other high-level weapons for the Philippines. And it was approved already by the US State Department. So it seems like there is this deal coming in. So it's an addition to what you call military buildup of the United States in the Indo-Pacific, specifically in the Philippines. Now, the question is very good, and that's a very good question. Your question is, what is the aim? What is really the end goal of the United States? Why it is doing all of these things, and why it is militarizing the Philippines? Even under Trump administration, because now we're in Trump administration. During Biden administration, we discussed all of this thing, Lena, and it was very, the Trump, the Biden administration was really focused more on geopolitics and trying to preserve hegemony, militarily speaking, of the United States in different parts of the world, including Eastern Europe or in Ukraine and now in Asia Pacific. But come on, this is Trump administration already. So I was expecting actually the Trump administration will be a little bit different when you talk about defense and military, that it will be cautious and it will be more prudent. But it seems that maybe I'm wrong with my expectation, especially in terms of militarizing the Philippines. It has something to do with the strategic goals of the United States in the Indo-Pacific. It's all about that. It reflects the US broader Indo-Pacific strategy to counter and contain China in the Indo-Pacific. Well, we need to remember that Trump, during the first presidency of Trump, the Indo-Pacific strategy was pushed. And I would expect that in this second presidency of Trump, still the push for the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US administration will be prominent in a matter of time. Right now, we don't see it clearly, and there's no pronouncement from Trump himself, precisely because he's busy in trying to get a peace deal with Russia over on the Ukraine crisis. But the moment it's done, and I think it's a little stable, and they can have an agreement with Russia in terms of pivot, I think the US, in terms of military and defense, will have a pivot to the Asia Pacific region, or what you call Indo-Pacific. And this Indo-Pacific strategy, to be frank with you, has something to do in countering and containing China in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And it's not only about tariffs, and it's not about economics per se. It's really about defense and military. And of course, the United States wants to maintain its kind of relevance, and hegemony, to, if you want to call it that way, and military dominance in the Indo-Pacific region, because they are so afraid, and they're so, how do you call that, is they have this kind of problem that in the Indo-Pacific, China is now the regional hegemon. It's really true. China is the hegemon in the Asia Pacific, but it's not only the major power in the Asia Pacific. You also have India, And India is a relevant power, a major power in our region. So, but the United States wants to preserve that it's still the number one. May it be in economics, I think, but more on defense and military. So this Indo-Pacific strategy will be pushed. That's my that's my reading by the Trump administration. And how to do this? They cannot do it on their own. They need their so-called military allies. And it just so happened that the Philippines is a military ally until now, of course, especially under Marcos Jr. administration of the United States through the what you call the Mutual Defense Treaty. So in pushing for the Indo-Pacific strategy, of course, you have to militarize your ally. And now it's happening in the Philippines, and I think it will continue to happen given that, the US State Department already approved an arms sale. It's one of the biggest arms sale thus far for the Philippines, between the Philippines and the United States. And I don't even know if the Philippine government or my country has that money to buy these arms. But I think from my reading as well, this is a bargaining chip for Marcos Jr. to ensure that, the United States will back him up, back and support his administration, and, that there will be a continuous kind of strengthening relationship between Washington and Manila under a Trump and a Marcos Jr. presidency, because Marcos Jr. will still have 3 years in power in office, and Trump has only 4 years, and then maybe he would want to be reelected if it's possible. So you can see there is still that overlap. 3 years, 4 years, there's still lots of time for them to, probably cooperate, but it's more on the military and defense. So that's my reading na. And obviously, the US is arming an ally like the Philippines to be in the front line. And they're using the South China Sea dispute in this regard, because it's easy to justify to say, like, Philippines, we're helping the Philippines because it has dispute in China. Easy to justify these things that, we are arming the Philippines so that it can defend itself against China. But come on, China is supposedly, it's a claimant state, but I don't think China has this policy of going to any kind of military conflict with any claimant states, for that matter, even with the Philippines. I don't think that's their policy. From what I know, when you talk about China, especially when you talk about military or defense, it's very defensive. They will not do anything unless you attack them first. And that's even my worry, Lena, that maybe, I mean, with the craziness of our government, a miscalculation happened, and we kind of, would do the first move. And of course, China will retaliate. And what will happen to us? Really, we're like a pawn in all of this geopolitical maneuverings of the United States vis-a-vis China. So that is a very problematic, and that's a very concerning and alarming situation at the moment. So if you look at the United States, what is really its goal? It's very obvious. It's strategic. It wants to preserve and pursue its strategic interest in the Indo-Pacific. And on the other hand, it also wants to strengthen its alliance with its allies, in deepening it, and providing more military aid, or military, it's not even aid, Lena, because we're paying for it. It's selling weapons to our country. And I think it's the deep state of the United States that's really benefit from all of these things. It's not even the it's not even the American people, I think, that benefits from all of these arms sales. It's not only Philippines that they're doing arms sales. I think they're also doing arms sales with Taiwan. That's why China is also very anxious and it's not happy about these things. However, that's the United States. On the other hand, the Philippines, under a Marcos Jr. administration, appears decisively aligning with the US-led security framework or architecture in Asia. And this strategic tilt, or kind of leaning, is risky for the Philippines. China, to be frank with you, this upcoming Balikatan Typhoon Missile System 2 already, an anti-missile, and all other high-level assets that will be deployed in the Philippines, the troops, China will interpret this deal, all of these things, including the 5.58 billion US dollars possible sale of arms to the Philippines. Definitely, China will interpret all of these things not merely as a defensive posture as far as the Philippines is concerned, but it may interpret, I'm not sure, but I'm not Chinese. So what I'm saying is, from my reading, is it may interpret all of these things as a potential escalatory move or escalation. So like, for example, the F-16 that we're saying that we will be buying from the United States, these are fighter jets. If you combine this with the 9 declared U.S. military bases, or what you call EDCA military bases, and you combine this with joint patrols and expanded U.S. rotational presence, for as far as China is concerned, this signals that the Philippines is no longer, we are no longer sitting on the fence. We're not just on the fence, but now we're active participant of this so-called geopolitical rivalry and competition between the with China and the United States, and US strategic containment, trying to contain China and constrain China in the Indo-Pacific, militarily speaking. So China will view us, oh, Philippines, you're not at the fence anymore. You're active participant. And that is not good for us Filipinos, because it means that China will look at us differently already. Not anymore in a friendly terms, but maybe, the Philippines maybe is also our adversary. So we have to prepare, and we need to do something against them too. So that is my worry. I'm not saying that China is already doing this, but if you put all of this together as a country, I mean, China will react and will have a different sense. Because this is the reality that they're facing vis-a-vis the Philippines being supported and being militarized by the United States. So this is my problem, because this is not good for the Philippines. Another thing, Lena, that I think very, very important to point out when you talk about this thing is, all of this is not stabilizing the region. It's not. This is not a stabilizing or promoting peace or stability or security in as far as Southeast Asia is concerned and as far as Asia Pacific is concerned. Actually, all of these things, militarizing the Philippines, being done by the United States, would fuel regional arms race, compelling China even to strengthen and fortify its military posture as far as the South China Sea is concerned and as far as the Taiwan state is concerned. And other countries in Southeast Asia and even the Asia Pacific would be more anxious to also, to have this arms race, precisely because they also have to think, okay, Philippines is doing this, we need also to do this, probably because we need to protect ourselves, because if anything happens, we will be dragged into something, or into a military conflict. So this is what I can see. This is what I can read, geopolitically speaking. So this trajectory risk pushing the region into a volatile and a militarized environment where heightened military and defensive posturing becomes normalized, and diplomatic space for conflict resolution is shrinking, especially when you talk about the South China Sea dispute. So this is not good for Southeast Asia. This is not good for the region. This is not good for my country.
I completely agree with you. I think you make a good point that people need to hear this conversation, hear your perspective on this, and really try to question what are we doing if you're in the United States and you pay taxes, then you need to
Yeah.
question where are your taxes going? If that's kind of the level that you need to be at to quantify what's going on, then you need to question why are my tax dollars going to arm the Philippines? And then maybe, we can talk about, is the Marcos administration truly acting in the best interest of the Filipinos? Because by putting them on the line and actually creating a target in a possible confrontation with China, um, that's arguably not really in the best interest of the Filipinos. And as you said, economic development and fighting poverty, making sure that trade ties are established and people have access to healthcare and to education and all of these things that should be prioritized, not diverting funds from these
Mhm.
social programs to militarize the country in the best interest of a foreign actor, which in this case appears to be the United States. And one of the things that really made me think is your sort of appeal to the United States population who may be listening to this conversation. I just read today, so far, the United States spent $1 billion bombing Yemen.
Oh my God.
And it's $1 billion that didn't stay here in the United States. As you mentioned, China actually warned that foreign meddling in South China Sea would be perceived as an escalation. which any
Yeah.
reasonable person would agree with. In a recent article that I thought was absolutely excellent, you mentioned Beijing is actually finalizing negotiations related to a code of conduct on the South
Mhm.
China Sea. And it is designed to avert confrontations in the region. So I think that points to the fact that China is indeed being, very, very patient as Japan and the Philippines are gearing up and militarizing. So, what is Beijing's plan here with the code of conduct on the South China Sea with the goal to prevent conflict? And what do you think is sort of the long-term plan that China may have to prevent any sort of conflict in the region?
The code of conduct on the South China Sea is not necessarily a solution to the dispute, because the dispute and the claims are very complicated. Some claimant states claim territoriality, or what you call sovereignty, on some parts of the South China Sea. Some, like for example the Philippines, the claims is based on UNCLOS and it's based on sovereign rights. Sovereign rights and sovereignty are not the same. They're not the same. So in a way, there's really a complication, very complex and complicated reference point when you talk about claims of the claimant states in the South China Sea. However, the code of conduct is a tool for crisis management. The moment it is pushed through, the moment it's there as a binding mechanism or even a document that everyone agrees, and it's within the ASEAN level and China, it's ASEAN plus China, it will create some kind of it would create some kind of normalcy in the South China Sea. And there will be a code of conduct that each of the claimant state will follow, and ASEAN and even the external forces, that what you can do and what you cannot do. It's a crisis tool.
Mhm.
It's a mechanism to avert crisis and to de-escalate the tension, and most especially for military conflict and military miscalculation on the ground not necessarily eradicated per se, but at least reduced to a greater extent. I think that's the value of the code of conduct. And I hope really, Lena, that the Malaysian leadership, chairmanship of the ASEAN right now could push for the conclusion of the code of conduct this 2025. I really hope so. But realistically, it's really difficult. Why? Precisely because ASEAN decides in a consensus manner. Like, for example, in one issue, if one country would say no, even if the 9 countries, because we have 10, East Timor is still an observer. So out of 10, if only one would say no, nothing happens. So because of the consensus decision-making process in ASEAN. But I really hope that the Malaysian leadership will be more creative, will push and work well with all ASEAN countries and plus China to really have this code of conduct concluded. But if not, I really hope that the process continues, because this is important. I really have high hopes for the code of conduct, though I am not really sure when it will be concluded. Realistically, I don't think this year or next year, but I still have hopes that Malaysia will be able to do something about this. Yeah.
I hope so too. And I know you care very much about the Philippines. And I really appreciate you joining me today. This was such an interesting conversation. I think it is truly eye-opening because we rarely get to hear from those who are in the Philippines, who are, willing to speak up, who are brave enough to speak up. And you're certainly a very valuable voice. So thank you so much, Anna, for these truly valuable insights that you shared with us today. I would love to continue this conversation, and I hope to catch up again soon with you.